At the end of the canal and stretched across it is the membrane, the so-called eardrum, which is a circle of skin about 8 millimeters in diameter. Inside the drum is a space filled with air with 3 small bones in it, called the hammer, anvil and stirrup. And that's the smallest bone in the body, which is good for quizzes. And those 3 bones are joined together and connect the membrane to this part, which is the inner ear. So we've got outer ear, middle ear and inner ear. And it's the inner ear that does hearing and a large part of balance. When a complex sound comes in, at any instant, it's absorbed by the membrane and carried through by the 3 bones into the cochlea. This shell's hollow, filled with a very special fluid, and the vibrations of the sound create a little ripple that spreads out and becomes a wave that travels around this spiral. And around this spiral are about 15,000 small microphones that do the hearing. And they're like stage microphones. They convert sound to an electrical signal. As it turns out, the high frequencies are detected very quickly at the base, but the low frequency components take time to reach the top of the ear when they're detected before they do their sort of tsunami. So there's a delay in the detection of high frequencies and low frequencies in the cochlea. The sound signal travels along the acoustic nerve fibres, of which there are about 30,000, to the brain, then through various relays up to perception about 1/5 of a second later. It's the most beautiful bit of the body. And then somehow the brain manages to extract from that signal the sounds of birds singing, children crying, speech, laughter, and music.
Let's listen to listening. Patch this word back into itself. Folding back into itself. Unpacking itself. In feedback. This word. Listen.
I think this is it.
This is Coquet Head and the source of the river. That's Scotland, and we're just in Scotland here. And down to the east and the south is the actual appearance of the river, but it comes from this moss and this bog. This is the crown, the dome. And I like to think romantically that this post was put here as some sort of marker, because it's not part of a fence. So to me, this is Coquet Head, the source of the river. You can feel it bounce. We're on top of a giant sponge that's slowly starting to soak and percolate downhill. I like this. I like the sound of this place. I like this. Well, there's a military jet over there. But I like that deep sense of quietness, because it enables you to listen into the distance and to focus and to start to be able to listen properly. You know, I've said many times, we hear everything, but we rarely get the chance to listen. And this is one of the few places, certainly in England, where I can do that. At this time of year, the start of winter, it's very, very quiet, because most of the wildlife, the birds and other animals, have migrated down the river to the coast. And so you can hear tiny micro sounds like the stems of this juncus grass vibrating together. I go and spend a lot of time listening before I do any recording these days. Anybody can do it. You start to engage with the place and, listening, looking and sort of feeling the wind on your face and feeling the sort of smell of the place. I start to get a sense of that sort of almost intangible sort of spirit of the place, which I'm sure is embodied in the sound of it, the acoustic qualities. So a place like Coquet Head, what I'll do is then try and tune into those sounds. And then other things start to suggest themselves to me. It appears a very peaceful, tranquil landscape, but what I like and I'm interested in is that this place has a very different history, has a very violent and bloody past from when the Romans were here, and they had one of the last outposts of the Roman Empire in the north. It's just over this brow of the hill, and then the border reivers, these lawless families who control this area, literally, where laws passed in London were of no concern to them because they control this area with the sword. So if you weren't part of them, then you didn't last very long. This is literally a blood-soaked landscape, as well as one that now holds lots of water. And I like to think that sense of history, and maybe some of the sounds of that history, have been recorded in this very absorbent landscape. And so potentially, and perhaps romantically, I like this idea of being able to draw sounds out of the landscape. I like the idea of that. I like the sound of that.
Chris listens into the distance and teases out the spirit of this place. For Chris, this is a blood-soaked landscape, but for me, this video is itself blood-soaked. There is a separation and longing deeply embedded. In the sky, in the earth, in the horizon line, in the eroding water, in the blades of grass, in the wrinkles on Chris's brow, in the searing waveform, in every cut-out pixel. in every switchblade of code. You see, I filmed this with my ex-girlfriend. We were there together, behind the camera. That autumn was the beginning of the end for us. For years after we split up, I couldn't even bring myself to open the folder of footage, terrified of what might be released. At night, I often lay in the dark, stroking the inner contours of a twisted knot, listening softly to a warped heart. It didn't really start with a pure word all on its lonesome. I was there too, and it all started with a tear. But there's naught pure on this mortal coil. So eventually, after some slipping and sliding, I decided to make a move and use the footage as the starting point for this film. I went listening for listeners to listen to, not really knowing where it would take me, playing it by ear. Taken by liquid flows to find and be found, taking whatever came to hand, I kept my ear to the ground. Eventually, I met the sound artist Joe Thomas at a Christmas party. Joe had been making music at the Diamond Light Source Particle Accelerator, collaborating with scientists such as Gunter Ryan and Michael Abbott.
It just changed my perception of music. I know that I'm never going to be the same person again.
Listening to the crystal sounds of the synchrotron, which accelerates electrons to create a beam of light 8 billion times stronger than the sun, to sense into matter. I've been friends with Dan Wilson for over a decade. Sound artist, inventor of curious instruments, and searcher of miraculous sounds. Here he is, electromagnetically resonating some railings, using one of his homemade devices. Before we crossed paths, I used to listen to his radio show every week on Resonance FM.
You can cover me with pillows, but don't take away my clothes. But don't take away my anti-music. Don't take away my anti-music. Don't take away my anti-music. Oh, give us sweet and
Later, we met and formed a band together with Chris Weaver and Fari Bradley. We're called Oscillatorial Binnage. I'd always loved listening to music, but never thought I'd get to be in a band, because I can't play any instruments. But when we make music together, it's all improvised. Improvised music collapses the boundary between listening and composing, since it only really works when something emerges beyond any individual player. We're always listening intently to the movement of the whole sound, hoping that through the intensity of our attention, it will all somehow come together. All sounds are welcome. Usually the more uncontrollable, the better. Often using Dan's homemade instruments. Or concrete under intense pressure. Or the sweet touch of dessert. Or the resonant frequency of the space itself. Or even the video camera turning off.
I live in Bishop Stortford, a commuter town not far from London, and it's a very interesting place for bin diving. All the time I look through the trade waste bins looking for objects to create these acoustic assemblies with. And from these acoustic assemblies, I'm trying to create interesting sounds that can then be worked into musical compositions. And every so often, something really interesting happens. And I call these moments miraculous agitations. Miraculous agitations are complex sounds which occur every now and then in the real world around us. Any agitational forces, such as drafts of air or hums of electromechanical appliances, allow for vibrational interactions between clustered objects. When combinations of different vibrational forces are acting simultaneously upon clustered objects, really amazing sonic flourishes can be heard. You can hear there's a really interesting effect happening here on this fence. As the tree's grown, it's been spliced by the fence as it's trying to grow over it. You can hear the scream of the fence as it's being distorted by the growth of the tree. To get a miraculous agitation in the wild, you need these kind of tensions in objects. It's really amazing. It's a great noise. It's one of those ear-catching flourishes that catch you unaware and then kind of romance you into their mysteries. It sounds as if it's possessed. It's a very interesting sound. It's effects like this which spur on your inspiration, really, in finding things you can translate to laboratory conditions.
My experience of listening to the sound when I walked into the space was that I'd never heard anything like it before. It sounded completely unique, with lots and lots and lots of sounds happening all at the same time. When you're in the synchrotron, you're completely removed from the world. There's nothing moving apart from this huge, huge synchrotron beam. The space itself captures the sense of timelessness. I feel like I'm on an advert now. No, okay. The space itself, no. Can I say it in a minute and then no? Yeah. The space itself captures a sense of timelessness.
Because? Were you going to explain?
Because it's always light, and so it never goes dark. It never changes. The light never changes.
Diamond light source produces light in the very general term, X-rays mostly, and as such it's a very bright source. The X-rays which we produce are about 1 billion times brighter than what you can get from a hospital X-ray source. And this machine which we have here behind us and besides us is the device which produces those X-rays, and it does so by accelerating electrons to nearly the speed of light, making them circulate in the storage ring, and as they're bent in their path, they produce these very bright X-rays. So you can look through matter to understand how life works. And that's what all this light is used for.
So here we are in the synchrotron electron storage ring, and we can hear a cacophony of pitch and noise-based sounds. I can hear the streams, there's so many streams of noise and pitch differentiation, and I can hear that now. And it's always changing, and it's just beautiful. I was just listening here now, and I could hear this, that sound happens all the way around the synchrotron. The week that I went to Diamond to kind of do my research, I was told to meet Günther Ryan about the way that they were monitoring the synchrotron. Then he took me to the lab. Then I put my headphones on, and then I listened to all the sound. He said, what do you think of this? And he was actually really excited about this material. I heard what was going on in the heart of it. And then when I found it, I spent all the rest of the week there in the lab, sort of the central lab, which monitors the synchrotron.
We've been listening to the motion of the beam, and I'll start calling it motion, not the sound of the beam, because there's the question of what is sound and what is motion. So in this stainless steel pipe which you see there, that's where the electron beam is actually circulating around in this big ring. And there's a device there which you can see with the two black cables coming out on the top, and that is what we call a pickup. So that senses the position of the electron beam as it passes through. And it works a little bit like a pickup on an electric guitar. You can sort of imagine this electron beam as one big string being supported by the magnets. And if you plug it anywhere, it will actually vibrate all the way around. And that's why then, if you plug it somewhere, you hear the same vibration everywhere. This beam, ideally, should be resting, but it makes minute little motions. The motions are sub-micrometer sized, but we'd like it to be even more stable. And so we've watched that motion on a kind of oscilloscope-like display, and then we said, well, hang on a minute, if we can watch this, we should also be able to listen to it, because these are audible frequencies. So we plugged in the headphones and we listened to it and found it quite interesting, because we could suddenly recognize different effects in the noises which we were listening to. And we realized that it's better to sort of bring this information into the brain through the ear than through the eyes. The ear is actually a very good real-time spectrum analyzer in technical terms, so it can distinguish quite clearly between little differences, while visually these might be minute and difficult to catch.
The listening is concentrated, so it's very focused. They're listening for emissions. They could tell me what was going on in the being, why it was going on, and when it was going. You know, that was just through sound. I found that amazing.
And then Joe got involved and said, oh, these are interesting noises, can you show me some more, play some more to me?
I knew that the sound that I was working with was extremely special, but I had no idea what I was going to do until I found the recordings of the heart of the synchrotron, you know, the electron beam. And the injection of atoms was just so, wow. You know, just imagining what they would actually sound like. You know, this rush of energy and just something beyond what I could experience here and now. So when I went into the studio and wanted to make something unique, maybe as unique as the experience that I had when I went there, if that makes sense, because it was so completely different from anything I'd seen or heard before. I don't know whether I did because, well, I feel that I did because the way that I listened to it, but I'm not sure whether other people would hear it like that.
True miracles, probably quite subjective. Technically, they're just very complex sounds. They're emergent sonics. But their usefulness to the composition process is really valuable because they bring out new ideas. They give back information. They often provide information that's completely unpremeditated, things that you never really realised that you wanted.
Then something happened. An encounter that gently took hold of this film and made me lose track of its origins. It was a damp winter's night, and I was on my way home from work on the 253 bus, buried in a book.
The destination of this bus has changed. Please listen for further information.
Halfway up Seven Sisters Road, the bus broke down, so I got off and hopped onto the next bus. There was only one seat left, upstairs, near the back, next to a woman.
I was riding home on the bus at the end of a long day. It was dark out and a bit wet, and I was staring out the window and I saw this beautiful man on the street, and his face was very sensitive.
There was music coming from somewhere. I looked out the window and saw a man sitting on a stool.
He was playing the accordion, and I was staring down at this man and very fascinated. And I noticed the guy next to me watching the same guy, and we looked at each other and both felt the same thing about this man on the street. And he then started to speak to me, and then I gestured that I couldn't hear and that we needed to write things back and forth.
So I took out a pen and we proceeded to scribble all over the book I'd been reading. And that was how I met the writer, Louise Stern.
Then that was Toby. It's a nice story.
Something special had happened here, of which the accordion player had been an integral part. After all, he had brought us together by sound and its absence. Every day, on the way home from work, I looked out for him from the bus home, hoping to meet him and include him in the film. But he seemed to have disappeared. A couple of weeks passed and I had started to give up hope. But then one day he was there again, playing in exactly the same spot, with the same sweet and distant look. We had no languages in common, so all I know is that his name is Pedro.
Toby found the guy again and filmed him a little bit, and we talked about our difference of perception, because I couldn't hear the music the guy was producing and he could, but it ends up that we had and still have the same perception, no matter whether you can hear the person or not.
To meet Louise is also to meet her interpreter Oliver, with whom she has a symbiotic relationship. A week or so later, we all met up for dinner. When I asked them if there was anywhere in particular they'd like to be interviewed, they both said, anechoic chamber. Actually, this is really where the film begins. In the middle, not with a word or a tear, but with an encounter, a relation.
Sound is such an abstract thing to me, and this space feels equally abstract. It's otherworldly. Do you like it, Oliver? Yeah, I like it. It's funny how sound feels in this room. The fact we've been in so many different perceptions of what sound is and isn't, and we hadn't been in this particular setting before, made it that much more interesting. So yeah, it's very, very curious. Yeah, for me, it's the same. It's kind of like full circle. You feel like you've been to all places noisy and not. Growing up in the deaf community, I really felt that the lack of voice was so important for us, that defined us. When I went on my own and made a different life for myself, I was trying to figure out how to function in a world of the voice. Oliver already knew that he wanted to become an interpreter. I knew that I didn't want the kind of life that I knew. So both of us were trying to figure things out. And I decided to move to London to go to school. Oliver offered to come along as my interpreter. And we both just ended up staying all through those years of trying to figure out what I was trying to do and what I wanted to do and how to do it. We were partners through the whole thing. And it became kind of from a deaf person interpreter traditional relationship morphed into what is now much more of a collaborative friendship.
Someone other had entered the frame, showing me that any act of perception is defined by what is left out, that sound is in fact defined by silence. And now there was Oliver too.
So with a kind of traditional interpreter relationship, the interpreter is there to, to be the voice, to just pass on communication. You give up your right to be able to say what you think. I'm really happy a lot of the time not saying anything, and I think it's an interesting exercise. There are other situations I find myself in having very, very strong opinions, like what that person just said is total BS, and I can't say anything.
I have recently noticed an increase in a degraded sort of behaviour that threatens the very picturesqueness of Bishop Stortford. I refer to the number of people I now see unashamedly rummaging through dustbins in our town.
I used to go looking in various bins much later at night, after 11 o'clock, but then you get all the post-pub people who are actually more violent. They throw things at you. They're more violent than the daytime people who just cast you strange looks and make strange gestures and shout things at you from cars like wanker and things like that. And various names that have been attached to me, like Bin Man, Merc Man. And when I try to explain that I'm vibrating objects in assemblies to harvest the miraculous agitations, it's difficult to explain, and it's even more difficult to understand. So there's animosity there. There's something socially unacceptable about looking in bins. In fact, I've got a newspaper, which I kept, which is one of the most strangest letters. I like it. I've kept it because it's one of the oddest things I've read, and it says, stop rooting in dustbins.
Understandably, people are tightening their purse strings in these difficult times. But are they so desperate that they find it necessary to pick through dustbins, often in broad daylight? And is it actually legal?
But that exercise in itself of you can't say anything, but you really, really wish you could, I think it's in some ways good for a person, and it makes you humble. And it makes you think of all the other places in the world where people are saying things that you don't agree with, that you would say something that you don't, because you're not there. And so when people actually do get all like excited and they argue and they're like, that's not right and this kind of thing, it's like, really what you're saying is not that important.
This kind of behaviour was unheard of during the bleak war years. Nowadays, folk are more brazen in their actions, completely unaware of the feelings of others and of the ridiculous, pitiful theatre that they present others with. It really is an eyesore.
In the leftovers, I had found a new beginning. But to what end? Sound now seemed less and less important, and I felt more lost than ever. So I held these found subjects, these folders, between my ears, and I wondered how to compose a film from such parallel lives. But gradually, I began to realize that what I had was a collection of shared moments. That these could rub up against each other on another plane of listening. That these had, in fact, already started to cluster around each other.
We're trying to use the sound and the ear as the way to get the information into the brain and to analyze it. And there are some noises of which we know they are completely sort of parasitic and they shouldn't be there. So these were the ones where later we said to Joe, don't use those because they're not the real sounds.
Some of the sounds for the scientists that were absolutely, completely and utterly shouldn't be heard. They were a no-go area. They totally not to be audible because it's rubbish from the synchrotron.
What we called the wrong sounds were those where we only created the sound because we deliberately moved the beam. In fact, it wasn't then a real recording of the sound, but it was sort of an artifact how our system distorted what we put into a sound. So it was making some clicking and pinging, but that wasn't really there. It was only there because we did something to it and because there were sort of some limitations in the system which then created this sound. And Joe got very excited about that. And we said, no, this is all nonsense. Yeah.
Because I worked with Glitch, what they found rubbish, my perception was it was extremely exciting and there were pretty lovely attacks and there was a lot of noise based and it was very rhythmical, but actually it was rubbish that was being picked up from the software and it shouldn't be used. So it kind of, I knew some of it.
She had such a completely different perspective on things. When we listened to those sounds, we always tried to make connections to what the origins of the sounds were, what effect was underlying. While Joe didn't really want to know where that comes from, she just wanted to know what it listens like. And she could hear differences which we couldn't. And she would just be interested in these different nuances of the sound. Of course, I mean, once you sort of were led to hear these things, it's impossible to get it out of your head again, yes? So, like for instance, while before, when we were listening to these injections into the storage ring, which happen every 10 minutes at a pace of 5 per second, we just heard sort of a regular clicking 5 times per second. But Joel pointed out that actually the various clicks are slightly different. So now if you listen to it again, you will always notice that every click sounds slightly different.
I wanted to use the material because It made the project really whole because there was this idea of sharing and communication in the sound, deeply embedded.
Communication in its purest form is a switch going on and off at irregular intervals. To encode a measure of meaning in ups and downs, in sound and silence, in words and spaces. For a long time, I've been collecting video of dying neons. I feel somehow they are saying something I can't understand, in a code unknown, chattering away on their deathbed, finally freed from just functioning for humans. Able to turn themselves on and off in a kind of improvised scat, slowly dissolving into a final off. Here was the most wonderful example at Liverpool Street Station, when many lights were dying together, drifting in and out of sync with each other.
I think that's the thing about being human. It's our need to communicate ourselves and the emotions that drive that need. And all of that communication feeds from the same source, that emotional core. And if you just allow yourself to feel comfortable with that, then lack of voice becomes not such a big deal. I think that sign language lends itself to different qualities of communication because it's physical, it's visceral language. Using words to describe this is a challenge in itself, and it's clumsy. I don't know if I think in sign language itself, but I definitely don't think in words. It's something more fluid, something more emotional, something that doesn't search for a form. So for me, signing is more faithful to those feelings than words are. Painting feels like that. If I could hear, maybe I would say that music feels like that.
Dead bird. No skull. Although I am convinced that the prime management problem
is making it happen. One has to accept that in life there is always at least an even chance that one is going the wrong way.
In the town where I live, there's a kind of animosity towards bin diving. So what I like to do is put things back out there again for people to find. Strangely crafted objects, such as a bird skeleton inside a hollowed out book, or sometimes recordings of the music that I've made from all the stuff that I've found in the bins. So there's a kind of continuous interchange between finding things and putting things back out there again. Things just to leave about, to cause confusion or elicit some kind of response. And I like to think this is affecting some kind of quantum change in the behaviour of the people that often shout insults at me.
But funny enough, that's also why I don't really feel connected to a lot of other writers. Because they really take the idea of the voice for granted and put so much importance on it. And for me, I put no importance on it. It's that. I think it's the giving up of the importance of the voice that has one of the biggest influences. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
So what this does is it's a coffee grinder with a speaker in the drawer, and then the resonant frequency of the box can be controlled by the filter on the top and by the drawer itself, and it demonstrates how you can tune an object to specific frequencies. So you can find all these objects around just as junk, and then they become modules, they become filters. Which, if they're electronic, you'd have to pay quite some money for, and they're free. So you've got an acoustic filter here, which can be used as a module in an apparatus. That's it. That's it. That's not all to say. Any questions? Any questions?
Of course I've felt like an outsider, often, but it's a good position to be in. I think most people who try to create something in any way are outsiders, in one way or another. If you accept your position as an outsider, then you can do a lot with it.
When I was in the synchrotron, I was introduced to Michael. Michael actually built the software that Gunther was working with. So he built the software that monitored the sound on the synchrotron.
We get this bursts and you see that ringing. It goes bing, bing, bing. And you can hear that very audibly as this sort of I can't remember what it sounded like.
Yeah,
this chip, chip, chip
it's
sound.
like a noise attack. I was working with them.
Yes, yes, yes. I think you
told
use...
me them.
Yes. We get this, well, they are rubbish. They're not supposed to be there. I think going to coin the phrase dolphins and whales for some of these noises. Yes. Yes, they're not really what... Well, this is the stuff we're trying to eliminate. My purpose is to try and capture as much data from the machine, reduce it in order to make sure it's not misbehaving.
Yeah.
Whereas your intention is really to watch it with interest and listen.
Make interesting music.
Yes, yes. And so, of course, I want it to be as boring as possible. Yeah.
I definitely feel like a lot of what people say is either just to fill space or sometimes just purely practical. But actual efforts to communicate with other people are almost never or very, very rarely happening. I like watching people try to communicate with their bodies when they're in the same physical space. I feel much more intimate through those types of interactions.
Right. So, and then when you came, it was quite interesting to kind of deal with you in terms of capturing the data, and your perspective on the data is, of course, totally different. Yes, yes.
So I was drawing ideas of metaphor and science and music going out together, maybe. So I was listening to the noise and putting ideas into the noise. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm really not sure.
It does to me.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. I mean, there are lots of noises in this space. There's quite, yes.
I used to be really uncomfortable watching people talk, not knowing what to do with myself, and making other people potentially feel uncomfortable because they knew I was watching and not understanding, and I didn't really know what to do. It felt strange. But now it's different. It's almost meditative. Hearing people tend not to make that much eye contact, and deaf people, rule number one is you're making eye contact. Hearing people's eyes kind of wander around, and so I don't feel that invasive, really picking out features in their face and kind of analyzing them to a point where, you know, it would be considered rude from a hearing perspective almost. And I feel close to them in that moment. Often, if and when I find out what they've actually said, I prefer the moment of intimacy rather than knowing what they said.
When Oliver isn't around and Louise meets someone who doesn't sign, they'll usually have a chat by scribbling on any scraps of paper that are laying around, just like we did on the 253 bus. Over the years, she's collected many of these fragments in a locked cupboard just outside the front door of her flat. boxes are bursting at the seams with traces of chatter stuffed into every nook and cranny. But sometimes, over time, that chatter can become a deep intertwining. And in hindsight, that first encounter can become a sort of creation myth for all future intimacy.
We met at this hippie summer camp, and there was a list of people who were going to work there, and the deaf community is really small. I remember this name, Oliver Poliat, and I thought, this person must be very sophisticated and French, kind of international person, and somebody who's an interpreter. And I heard from another friend who I grew up with that had worked with Oliver, and so I was curious to meet him. I remember instantly feeling a connection from the moment that we met. And I was very curious about him. Obviously, there was something there that was different, like he was a different thinker. And so I wondered, who was this person? And there was already kind of, like some kind of connection that we both are on the same level somehow. Yeah, I remember. I remember it was at camp. I mean, we were really young. I think we were maybe like 19 or 20 years old. But yeah, I mean, for me, I remember it was like, it was kind of confusing to meet someone who you have this kind of connection with, because when you're like a 19 or 20-year-old boy, you don't really know what that means, right? Because you kind of fancy everyone. You're like, oh, and then you have this like deep connection, and then like within like I think about 3 minutes or 5 minutes, Louise was like, okay, this is not the right direction, and I'm like, okay, thank you for telling me. And then it was totally fine. Like it was almost like she knew how to talk to me as like 20-year-old Oliver before I knew like what was going on with myself, because you're kind of, you're finding yourself at that time. She's saying, plus you were dating Barbie Amazon. Yes. Also that. But we had a deeper connection than I had with anyone else there. But it felt like it was the beginning of an important friendship, but we didn't really understand in what way. I decided to move to London sometime after that, and I was thinking about who might interpret for me. And Oliver said, how about me? And I thought, well, of course. Before, we had already had a very strong friendship, but after that year, it was set in stone. My work started to develop after that, and we always found each other and grew together in a very natural and beautiful way. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think there's something there where you kind of cross like a bridge between being connected with someone and being really good friends with someone. This person will be friends with you, or you will know this person for the rest of your life, to family, to becoming family. And that's really what happened after that year in London. So our life paths really have not really strayed very far from each other for 15 years or something. And that's really amazing. It shows you about like fate, and it shows you about family. It's the kind of thing you look back, and I'm not the type of person to look back a lot, but when you do, you feel really privileged. You feel really lucky to have people in your life like that.
think of sound in respects to there's like a skin of sound, and a glitch is something that actually goes underneath this skin, and once someone goes underneath the skin, that's when or once something or someone or like some sound goes underneath the skin, then that's when something touches you. The glitch is something that just fits straight in and touches you. But I compose with glitch because I really want to compose with emotion and electronic work. That's really important to me, and the older I get, the more important it becomes. Actually, I can't. I'm crying. Okay. The emotion in the work comes from the sound. I think it comes from the data. I really do. I think Crystal made itself. I work with emerging forms. I wait for things to come out of the material rather than forcing things onto the material. And I do that with the entire way that I compose and think about music.
So now I've got all these objects, I've got the ingredients for sonic emergence. And emergence is defined as large-scale sophisticated behaviour emerging from an aggregate of simple systems. And I just chuck them all into these electromagnetically resonated cauldrons and let them sing at their natural frequencies in their natural voices, and just hunt for miraculous agitations, which are the emergent moments where interesting things happen, and hopefully come up with something that really does profoundly affect the ear. So what you've got here are two bowls. They're both ferric, they're both magnetic, and they're both being resonated by non-contact methods. Slowly, you can build up a cauldron of objects by adding objects. I'm just going to turn on some of the resonators now. And slowly, I'll introduce objects to change the timbre and bring in overtones and miraculous agitations, hopefully. Those unpremeditated sounds which take you by surprise. And you can make slow adjustments and try and alter the process of vibration to bring in new vibrations. The benefits of doing this acoustically rather than electronically are that you're taken by surprise. Electronic systems are very goal orientated. They lead you towards what you want. These systems give you what you didn't know you wanted. It's a process of exploration and just exploring,
stirring. You should be very patient for these tones to emerge.
For me, the concept of listening really connects with signing. The sign for listening is made at the ear, but to listen means to take everything that is outside of your body and put it inside of your body. So this movement that happens within the sign is more about being in tune with the environment and not putting so much emphasis on yourself as an individual, about your own experience. It's almost a letting go. That's what listening means to me. Sign language does have a different relationship to the world. And that relationship, that definition of how we work with words and use words doesn't allow you to express what is there. It becomes muddy through words. But equally, the attempt to pose silence as beautiful and pure and put deaf people toward that end of the spectrum is just, it's ridiculous. You need everything together, profane and sacred, noise and silence equally. All kinds of people, all kinds of human urges. That's what is actually sacred.
Found something. These engine tones build up. It's beginning to settle now. We lost it. It's gone. It's coming back. No, it's not doing it. Let's turn it off. We've lost the moment. But the I don't know. Yeah, keep. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Yeah, just it's a case of searching. Just keep searching, and that's fun. That's the fun part of it. So you turn these all on, and you create tension, three-way tension, and then you can add objects or take away objects. That's not even coming from here, is it? Can you hear that? No. Someone mowing their lawn outside.
So it was that a twist opened up my idea of listening. And though this film was composed in a straight line, that reversal curved this timeline into an arc, sketching a meandering wave, all the better to encounter you with. Music is often called a universal language, a sort of language of the birds, because of that emotional core it touches, where listening doesn't depend on hearing, where waves can become little tsunamis, pointing towards our mutual resonance in separation and longing.
Am I allowed to talk about Toby?
Yeah, if you like.
Sorry. So I think we were at your flat one night, Toby, and we had this kind of long conversation, but at one point, Toby brought up, and I'm not sure exactly what word was used, something about the motion, the ever-changing things, and this is the only real answer. And I think that's right. That's what the ocean represents to me. That huge elemental force that is always in constant flux, that's always changing, but is so substantial. And you can touch it, you can feel it, you can smell it, you can see it, but you can never really put your finger on it. And that's who we are as people, really.